You can measure the price of a car in dollars, the woman said with a polished smile, but sometimes the car tells you exactly how much its owner has given up on life. The laughter came quickly, bright and effortless beneath the towering glass ceiling of the annual Hayes Automotive Innovation Expo in downtown Chicago. Executives in tailored suits exchanged amused glances. Influencers quietly lifted their phones. A few reporters smirked as camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. At the center of the growing circle stood Ethan Brooks, one weathered hand resting on the faded hood of a rust-speckled 1998 sedan he had purchased years ago for just $120. Its paint had long surrendered to time. Tiny patches of primer peeked through the worn finish, and the driver's side mirror had been repaired so carefully that only someone looking closely would notice the hairline crack running across its edge. Beside him stood his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, clutching a small paper bag that held 2 homemade sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She looked up at the crowd, then quietly lowered her eyes, as though she had already learned that adults sometimes laughed before they understood. Ethan never lowered his. His calm blue eyes simply met the woman's confident stare without anger or embarrassment. Victoria Hayes, founder and CEO of Hayes Automotive Group, had built one of America's fastest-growing electric vehicle companies before turning 36. Every magazine praised her vision. Every business network admired her discipline. She had spent years proving that excellence deserved attention and weakness deserved replacement. To her, the battered sedan parked between concept supercars and luxury prototypes looked less like transportation and more like a mistake. "You actually drove that here?" she asked, almost unable to hide her disbelief. More laughter rippled across the polished showroom floor. Ethan brushed a little dust from the hood with the sleeve of his denim jacket. "It still gets me where I need to go," he answered quietly. "Sometimes," Victoria replied with a light shrug. "There comes a point when holding on costs more than letting go." Ethan smiled so gently that it almost disappeared before anyone noticed. "That depends on what you're holding on to." For the briefest moment, the conversation seemed to pause. Then another executive chuckled, breaking the silence, and the crowd relaxed again. Lily reached for her father's hand. His fingers wrapped around hers with quiet certainty. Above them, sunlight poured through the enormous skylights, reflecting across polished chrome, gleaming carbon fiber, and million-dollar machines built to represent the future. Yet somehow, the oldest-looking vehicle in the building drew every curious eye. No one could have guessed that before the afternoon was over, those same people would stop admiring price tags and begin questioning everything they believed about success. And no one, especially Victoria Hayes, had the slightest idea that the man standing beside the rusty $120 sedan carried a story capable of silencing an entire room without ever raising his voice. Ethan Brooks had never planned to bring the old sedan to an automotive expo. It was simply the only car he owned, the same dependable machine that carried him to work before sunrise, picked Lily up from school every afternoon, and made the weekly trip to the small cemetery on the edge of town every Sunday without fail. To everyone else, it looked tired. To Ethan, every scratch had a memory, every faded panel carried a promise that could never be replaced. 6 years earlier, life had looked very different. He had worked as an automotive engineer with a reputation for solving problems that left entire design teams scratching their heads. He loved creating machines that were efficient, practical, and built to last. But success had quietly lost its meaning after his wife, Emily, passed away following a long illness. The awards stayed on the office walls. The promotions kept coming. Yet every evening he returned to a house that sounded far too quiet. Then one afternoon, Lily climbed into his lap and asked a question that changed everything. "Daddy, are you coming home for dinner tomorrow?" She had asked it with complete innocence, unaware that he had missed dinner 4 nights in a row because another project deadline demanded another late meeting. Ethan resigned 2 weeks later. His colleagues called him brilliant but foolish. His manager offered a larger salary. Another company promised stock options. None of it mattered. He chose a smaller life because one little girl deserved a father more than another corporation needed an engineer. Since then, he had worked wherever honest work appeared. Sometimes he repaired engines. Sometimes he restored classic trucks. Sometimes he replaced brakes in neighborhood garages that could barely afford another mechanic. The income was unpredictable, but the schedule belonged to him. He never missed Lily's school concerts. He never forgot her birthday. He never broke another promise. The old sedan became part of that new life. He had found it sitting behind a repair shop with weeds growing around the tires. Most people saw junk worth $120. Ethan saw reliable transportation that could be restored one careful weekend at a time. Together, he and Lily washed it every Saturday morning. She handed him wrenches while he explained how every bolt had a purpose and every machine deserved respect if it was built with honest hands. Emily had believed that people were not defined by what they owned, but by how faithfully they cared for what had been entrusted to them. Ethan repeated those words so often that Lily could finish the sentence before he did. As the laughter from the showroom slowly faded behind them, Lily gently tugged on his jacket. "Daddy," she whispered, "does it bother you when people laugh?" Ethan looked down at his daughter, then back at the polished floor reflecting cars worth more than he would likely earn in several lifetimes. A peaceful smile crossed his face. "No, sweetheart," he answered softly. "People can only judge what they see. Character always takes a little longer to notice." Lily smiled back, squeezing his hand as if those words were worth more than every luxury car surrounding them. The afternoon continued with polished speeches, carefully rehearsed product demonstrations, and applause that echoed beneath the enormous steel beams of the exhibition hall. Victoria Hayes stepped confidently onto the main stage, welcoming investors, journalists, and industry leaders from across the country. Behind her, an enormous display screen revealed the company's newest prototype, a luxury electric performance vehicle designed to redefine American engineering. Cameras flashed as she spoke about innovation, leadership, and the future. Ethan listened quietly from the back of the audience while Lily sat beside him, swinging her legs gently from a folding chair that was almost too tall for her. She looked around at the expensive displays with wide eyes. "Everything is so shiny," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "New things usually are." Lily tilted her head. "Does shiny always mean better?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "Not always. Sometimes the strongest things are the ones that have already survived a long time." Before Lily could reply, a loud burst of applause interrupted them as Victoria announced the live unveiling of the prototype's autonomous driving system. Engineers gathered proudly around the sleek silver vehicle while reporters moved closer, eager to capture the historic demonstration. Victoria accepted a digital key from her chief engineer with complete confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "this represents thousands of hours of work from some of the finest minds in the automotive industry." She pressed the activation button. For 1 second, everything appeared normal. The dashboard illuminated. The headlights came alive. The large display screens flickered brilliantly. Then the entire vehicle suddenly went dark. Silence replaced applause almost instantly. One engineer hurried toward the driver's side, while another connected a diagnostic tablet. A third restarted the system. Nothing happened. Victoria's calm expression remained in place, but her eyes revealed the first trace of concern. She quietly asked, "Status?" The lead engineer swallowed. "We are checking the software." Another technician shook his head. "It is not responding." Within moments, several engineers surrounded the vehicle. Fingers raced across keyboards. Diagnostic cables stretched across the polished floor. Reporters exchanged curious glances as whispered conversations spread through the audience. Investors leaned toward one another, watching carefully. The atmosphere that had felt celebratory only minutes earlier now carried the quiet tension of uncertainty. Ethan observed without moving. His eyes rested on the disabled vehicle longer than anyone noticed. He did not step forward. He did not offer advice. He simply watched, studying small details that others overlooked, including a faint blinking indicator hidden beneath the front instrument panel and the unusual sequence of warning lights that appeared briefly before disappearing again. Lily looked up at him. "Daddy," she asked softly, "is something wrong with their car?" Ethan answered in the same calm voice he used whenever he explained an engine to her in their garage. "Every machine tells a story if you are patient enough to listen." Across the stage, Victoria folded her arms as another unsuccessful restart attempt ended in complete silence. The room had changed. Minutes earlier, people had laughed at an old sedan worth $120. Now hundreds of successful professionals stood quietly around a vehicle worth more than $1 million, unable to make it move even a single inch. The chief engineer removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes as another diagnostic report filled the tablet with lines of unreadable warnings. One technician suggested replacing the control module. Another blamed the battery management system. A third quietly recommended canceling the demonstration before more reporters noticed the growing confusion. Victoria remained perfectly still, although the confident smile she had worn all morning had disappeared. She glanced toward the audience and saw investors whispering behind folded programs while journalists refreshed their live news feeds. Every passing second felt heavier than the one before it. "We have 10 minutes, she said calmly. "Find the problem." The engineers nodded, but their movements became more hurried than focused. Ethan watched from several rows away. He did not interrupt. He simply observed the pattern of blinking lights each time someone attempted another. Restart. His expression never changed. Lily noticed the familiar look in her father's eyes, the same thoughtful silence she had seen countless evenings when he repaired old engines in their garage. "You know what it is, do you not?" she asked softly. Ethan answered without taking his eyes off the prototype. "I think I know where I would begin." Lily smiled. "Then why do you not tell them?" Ethan looked down at her with gentle patience. Advice is easiest to hear after people realize they need it. Just then one frustrated technician stepped backward, accidentally knocking a wrench onto the polished floor. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the exhibition hall, drawing even more attention to the stalled presentation. Victoria took a slow breath before stepping toward the vehicle herself. She pressed the start button once more. The dashboard glowed for only a heartbeat before fading into darkness again. A quiet murmur spread across the crowd. One reporter whispered, "This is going to be tomorrow's headline." Another quietly lowered his camera, expecting the event to end in embarrassment. Ethan finally stood. He handed Lily the paper bag with their untouched sandwiches. "Stay right here, sweetheart." She nodded without hesitation because she trusted him completely. Ethan walked forward at an unhurried pace, his worn work boots making almost no sound against the spotless floor. Several people recognized him as the owner of the old sedan and exchanged puzzled looks. One executive frowned. "What is he doing?" Another quietly laughed. "Maybe he wants directions to the parking lot." Ethan stopped a respectful distance from the stage. He did not raise his voice. "Excuse me, Miss Hayes." Victoria turned, immediately recognizing him. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face before professionalism returned. "Yes." Ethan spoke with the same calm tone he had used all afternoon. "May I look at it?" A few engineers exchanged skeptical smiles. One folded his arms. Another shook his head almost imperceptibly. Victoria studied Ethan for several long seconds. She remembered the weathered sedan, the quiet answers, and the dignity that had remained untouched by public. Laughter. Logic told her to refuse. Pride encouraged her to dismiss him. Yet something in his steady expression carried neither arrogance nor desperation. It carried confidence without performance. The enormous hall became strangely quiet as hundreds of eyes shifted from the disabled prototype to the humble mechanic standing beside his faded denim jacket, waiting patiently for an answer that could change far more than a single afternoon. Victoria looked from the silent prototype to the man standing calmly before her. Every instinct told her to protect the reputation of her company, yet every failed attempt by her own engineers had narrowed her remaining choices. Finally, she gave a small nod. "You may look, but please do not touch anything until my team is present." Ethan smiled politely. "That is fair." He stepped toward the vehicle with unhurried confidence, never trying to impress anyone watching. Instead of reaching for expensive diagnostic equipment, he slowly walked around the prototype once, studying the reflections beneath the overhead lights, listening to the faint clicks that escaped from the electrical system after each failed startup. He crouched beside the front wheel, closed his eyes for a brief moment, then stood again. One engineer whispered to another, "What is he doing?" The second answered with a quiet shrug, "I have no idea." Ethan leaned slightly toward the open driver's door and watched the instrument panel while another technician pressed the start button. The warning lights flashed in the exact sequence he expected before everything shut down again. He nodded almost to himself. "May I borrow a 3/8-inch socket wrench?" The request sounded so ordinary that several people looked confused. One technician hesitated before handing him the tool. Ethan accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you." He loosened a small access panel beneath the dashboard, carefully moved aside a protective cover, and examined a compact connector hidden behind a wiring harness. He did not rush. He simply traced the wiring with 2 fingers as though reading a familiar sentence from an old book. After a few seconds, he gently pressed one connector until a quiet click echoed beneath the panel. Then he secured the harness with a retaining clip that had slipped slightly out of position. "Please try again," he said. The chief engineer frowned. "That cannot possibly be all." Ethan stepped back. "Let the car answer." The engineer pressed the start button once more. This time the dashboard illuminated without flickering. The central display came alive. Cooling fans hummed smoothly beneath the hood. A heartbeat later, the electric motors awakened with a soft, confident tone that rolled across the exhibition hall like the first note of a long-awaited symphony. Every conversation stopped. Every camera lifted. Even the reporters who had been preparing disappointing headlines stared silently at the stage. Victoria looked at the instrument cluster, then at her engineering team, then back at Ethan. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Ethan handed the socket wrench back to its owner before answering. The connector was secure enough to pass inspection, but loose enough to fail under vibration. The system believed it was protecting itself from an electrical fault that was never actually there. The chief engineer immediately removed the access panel and inspected the connection himself. After several stunned seconds, he slowly looked up. "He is right." No applause followed. No celebration broke the silence. The room had become something far more powerful than noisy admiration. It had become a place where assumptions quietly fell apart, one humble truth at a time. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The prototype continued humming with flawless precision, while the enormous display behind the stage quietly confirmed that every system had returned to normal. The silence felt different from the laughter that had filled the hall earlier. This silence carried surprise, humility, and the uncomfortable realization that first impressions could be spectacularly wrong. Victoria Hayes slowly walked toward Ethan until only a few feet separated them. Her voice, once sharp with confidence, had softened. "How did you notice something my entire engineering team missed?" Ethan looked briefly at the restored vehicle before answering. "Machines usually tell the truth. The challenge is learning which details are speaking and which ones are only making noise." Several engineers exchanged thoughtful glances. Instead of sounding defensive, the chief engineer stepped forward and extended his hand. "Thank you. I have been chasing software problems for almost 30 minutes. I never thought to question the connector because it passed inspection." Ethan accepted the handshake with genuine warmth. That happens to everyone. Sometimes the smallest part creates the biggest question. Lily watched from the audience with quiet pride. She had seen her father solve impossible problems many times inside neighborhood garages, but this was different. Hundreds of strangers now saw the same patient man she had always known. She smiled without saying a word because she understood that her father never repaired machines to impress people. He repaired them because he believed everything deserved an honest chance before being discarded. Victoria looked across the showroom at the old sedan still parked near the entrance. Only an hour earlier, it had been the center of amused conversations. Now almost nobody was looking at it. Instead, every eye remained fixed on the quiet mechanic who had never demanded attention. A reporter finally broke the silence. "Sir, what company do you represent?" Ethan smiled politely. "No company. I own a small repair shop on the west side of the city." Another journalist asked, "Are you an independent consultant?" Ethan gently shook his head. "No, I just fix what people bring me." His answer produced another moment of thoughtful silence. There was no attempt to advertise himself, no business cards, no dramatic speech about proving anyone wrong. He simply picked up the paper bag Lily had been holding and made sure she still had her lunch before thanking the technician who had loaned him the wrench. Victoria watched every small gesture. The more she observed him, the more she realized that confidence did not always announce itself with expensive suits, polished presentations, or impressive titles. Sometimes it arrived wearing worn work boots, carrying a lunch packed for a daughter, and speaking with the calm certainty of someone who no longer needed the approval of strangers. As photographers continued taking pictures of the now functioning prototype, the applause finally began. It started with one engineer, then another. Soon the entire exhibition hall echoed with respectful applause directed not toward the machine, but toward the quiet man who had reminded everyone that true excellence rarely asks to be noticed. It simply shows up, does the work with dignity, and leaves the room better than it found it. By the time the exhibition resumed, the mood inside the hall had completely changed. Conversations no longer revolved around stock prices, luxury features, or ambitious marketing campaigns. Instead, people quietly asked the same question in different ways. Who exactly was Ethan Brooks? Victoria stood near the stage long after the reporters had moved on to interview her engineering team. She replayed the afternoon in her mind, remembering every word she had spoken beside the weathered sedan and every calm answer Ethan had offered in return. There had been no resentment in his voice, no attempt to embarrass her after proving himself right. That troubled her more than if he had celebrated his victory. Quiet dignity had a way of exposing pride without ever accusing it. Find everything you can about him, she quietly told her executive assistant. Educational background, work history, patents, anything. The assistant nodded and stepped away with a tablet. Ethan, meanwhile, was helping Lily finish the sandwiches they had packed that morning. They sat together on a simple bench overlooking the indoor display floor while visitors continued glancing toward them with growing curiosity. Lily smiled as she unwrapped the second sandwich. "Daddy, everybody keeps looking at you now." Ethan laughed softly. "That will probably stop by tomorrow." "Does that bother you?" she asked. He shook his head. Attention comes and goes. Character stays. An hour later, Victoria's assistant returned, looking more confused than before. "I think you should read this yourself." Victoria accepted the tablet and slowly scrolled through the report. Her confident expression faded with every page. Ethan Brooks held degrees in mechanical and electrical engineering from one of the nation's most respected universities. Years earlier, he had been listed as lead systems architect on several advanced drivetrain projects that had quietly influenced modern electric vehicle design. Multiple technical journals had cited his work. Several patents carried his name. More surprising still, one foundational control architecture currently used throughout Hayes Automotive had originated from research Ethan completed years before joining a different company. Victoria looked up from the screen in disbelief. "Why have I never heard of him?" The assistant answered honestly. "Because he disappeared from the industry 6 years ago. There are almost no interviews, no public appearances, and no recent publications." Victoria continued reading until she reached the final note. Resigned voluntarily following the death of his wife. Chose independent repair work while raising his young daughter. She slowly lowered the tablet. The crowded exhibition hall suddenly felt much quieter than before. She looked across the room and saw Ethan kneeling beside Lily, carefully tying the lace on her sneaker after it had come undone. There was nothing remarkable about the moment unless someone understood what success really looked like. No cameras surrounded him now. No applause followed him. He simply focused on the person who mattered most. Victoria felt an unfamiliar weight settle over her heart. For years, she had believed that greatness demanded constant visibility, endless achievement, and relentless ambition. Yet the man she had dismissed within seconds had quietly walked away from a celebrated career to keep a promise to his child. In that simple decision, she began to understand that the most extraordinary victories are often the ones the world never thinks to measure. As the exhibition slowly came to an end, many guests continued discussing the unexpected demonstration, but Ethan had already begun gathering Lily's backpack and folding the small blanket they had used while eating lunch. He had no interest in remaining the center of attention. He thanked the event staff for their kindness, waved politely to a few curious engineers, and started walking toward the parking lot where his old sedan waited beneath the late afternoon sun. Before he reached the exit, he heard footsteps behind him. "Mr. Brooks." Ethan turned and found Victoria standing several feet away. This time there was no audience surrounding her, no cameras, and no carefully rehearsed smile. She seemed like a completely different person. "May I have a moment?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Of course." Victoria glanced toward Lily before speaking. "First, I owe you an apology." Ethan remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I judged you within seconds of meeting you. I looked at your car instead of your character. I looked at appearances instead of experience. I was wrong." Ethan did not answer immediately. A gentle breeze drifted through the open entrance, carrying the distant sounds of traffic beyond the convention center. Finally, he smiled with the same calm kindness he had shown all day. "We all make quick judgments sometimes. What matters is whether we are willing to correct them. Victoria lowered her eyes for a brief moment, grateful that he had offered grace instead of resentment. Then she took a slow breath. I would like to offer you a position at Hayes Automotive. Not just any position. I want you to lead our advanced engineering division. You would have every resource you need, complete authority over future projects, and a compensation package worthy of your experience. Several executives standing nearby quietly looked toward Ethan, expecting him to accept without hesitation. Opportunities like this almost never appeared twice. Lily looked up at her father with quiet curiosity, waiting patiently for his answer. Ethan gently rested a hand on her shoulder before speaking. It is a generous offer, Miss Hayes, and I sincerely appreciate your confidence. He paused, looking toward the parking lot where the faded sedan reflected the golden evening light. But I cannot accept it. The executives stared in disbelief. Victoria blinked, convinced she had misunderstood. May I ask why? Ethan smiled gently. Because 6 years ago, I finally learned what success means for me. It means eating lunch with my daughter. It means picking her up after school every afternoon. It means keeping promises that no paycheck can replace. Victoria listened without interrupting. Ethan continued in the same peaceful voice. I enjoy solving engineering problems, but I enjoy being Lily's father even more. I spent too many years believing that promotions could wait for family. They cannot. Lily quietly slipped her hand into his, smiling as though she had heard those words 100 times before. Victoria looked at the little girl, then back at the man who had willingly walked away from prestige once before and was prepared to do it again without regret. In that quiet parking lot, surrounded by expensive vehicles and polished success, she realized that the richest person she had met all day was driving home in the oldest car she had laughed at only hours earlier. 1 year passed, and autumn returned to Chicago with crisp mornings, golden leaves, and cool winds that carried the scent of fresh rain through the city streets. The Hayes Automotive Innovation Expo opened its doors once again, but this year's atmosphere felt remarkably different. Visitors still admired futuristic vehicles and groundbreaking technology, yet one display attracted the largest crowd without relying on polished chrome or multi-million-dollar engineering. Near the entrance stood the same weathered sedan that had once inspired laughter. Its faded paint remained untouched. The tiny crack in the driver's side mirror was still there. The worn steering wheel showed years of faithful service. A small handwritten card rested beside it. It did not list horsepower, acceleration, or market value. Instead it read, "This car reminded us that character is never measured by appearance." People paused quietly before moving on. Some smiled. Others reflected silently before continuing through the exhibition. Across the hall, Ethan Brooks spoke with a group of young engineering students who had been invited to attend a mentorship program sponsored by Hayes Automotive. He had never accepted an executive office, but after many conversations, he had agreed to volunteer several days each month, teaching future engineers how to solve problems with patience, curiosity, and humility. His lessons rarely began with technology. They began with responsibility. Every machine deserves your full attention, he often told them. And every person deserves your respect before they earn your admiration. Nearby, Victoria Hayes watched the conversation unfold with quiet gratitude. The past year had changed her leadership in ways quarterly reports could never fully capture. She had encouraged her company to value collaboration over pride, careful listening over quick assumptions, and integrity over appearances. The changes had strengthened not only the business, but also the people inside it. When Lily arrived after school, carrying her familiar backpack, Victoria greeted her with a warm smile. Ready to show everyone your latest project? Lily nodded excitedly. Together, she and Ethan opened the hood of the old sedan for a group of children attending the expo. Lily proudly explained how her father had taught her that every bolt, every wire, and every small part mattered because ignoring little things often created the biggest problems. The children listened with wide eyes, asking questions that Ethan answered with patient encouragement. As the afternoon sun poured through the towering glass ceiling, its warm light reflected not from the newest concept cars, but from the faded hood of the oldest vehicle in the building. No one laughed this time. They simply looked with a new understanding. Victoria walked over and stood beside Ethan. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "For what?" She glanced around the crowded hall before answering. For reminding me that leadership begins with respect. Ethan looked toward Lily as she laughed with the young students. Sometimes life teaches us through unexpected teachers. The room settled into a peaceful silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone present understood something words could never fully explain. A car may have a price, a title may carry influence, and success may attract attention, but quiet dignity, faithful love, and humble character remain the only treasures that grow more valuable every time they are shared.